Welcome to this recording of the Activist Lawyer podcast, brought to you from the Granite Podcast Studio in the heart of Newry City. We are delighted that you could join us at Activist Lawyer, a new podcast and online forum where we will be discussing all sorts of matters, including current issues as they unfold. We'll be engaging not only with lawyers, but people who are committed to highlighting and combating injustices and inequalities. We will bring you our thoughts and invite you to share yours. We'll be looking for contributors to our blog at www.activistlawyer.com, as we want your perspective as we unravel and unpack so many important topics. So hello everybody, again I'm joined by our lovely Jessica, who has again been flat out working on the hashtag Choose to Challenge. So you can check out our activistlawyer.com blog and our social media channels. We're on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter to find out how that's been going. It's been really exciting buzz around the office, and we actually got cake, didn't we?
We did. Shout out to Jack. He's been kicked off the show this month, and I'm replacing, but he will be back shortly.
He'll be back. But he has been looking after us all and
sweetening us up with cake.
With lots of cake to celebrate the festivities around International Women's Day. Taking part in lots of webinars, learning loads. All of us have been, so it's been fantastic. There's been millions of events going on, really great resources throughout the month. So fantastic. Now, we have had Irish Examiner political correspondent Aoife Moore on the show. You'll hear that recording today. She discusses primarily women in the media. But as you'll hear, Aoife openly chats about her own experiences as a young woman journalist trying to make it in a really cutthroat industry. I don't know how she does it. We think she's doing a fantastic job, really pretty great. And Aoife has been in high demand for International Women's Day events for 2021. Well, because she's great, but also because there aren't that many of her, women political correspondents at her level. So we learned a lot about underrepresentation within particular industries the last few weeks. Minority groups aren't represented, women are not represented. And, of course, women make up the majority of society and we live in a very diverse society. So Aoife really puts forward this message about true representation, and the media must reflect, our diverse society on every level. Where are the Black Irish correspondents? Where are all the women? So these are the themes that she goes through, and she's extremely lively and uplifting as well. So we hope you enjoy listening to Aoife.
Enjoy.
Thanks. Bye. Aoife, thank you so much for joining us to help celebrate International Women's Day 2021.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Not at all. So it's great to have your perspective, both, I suppose, the issue that we're covering today, primarily women in the media, and also looking at you and your career in political journalism. But it's something that's come up in the media very much in recent weeks, and I've been just following some of the press coverage about it, and I thought it'd be really interesting to get someone on to talk about their experience and their perspective on it. So it's great to have your angle for someone who works right there in the thick of it. But just to kind of give us a little bit of a flavour and a bit of background for our listeners, how did you get into journalism, Aoife? Just a wee bit about your journey.
So, as you said, I'm born and reared in Derry City, and during the peace process, which I think had a massive kind of effect on my upbringing. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of the Bloody Sunday family. My uncle was shot and killed on Bloody Sunday, and my family were one of the founding families of the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign. Mm-hmm. And I think that really moulded kind of my life, for better, for worse. We were always at press conferences and protests, and there was always, journalists hanging around when it came to the anniversary in January. And my parents, my dad especially, even though it wasn't his side of the family, my dad is obsessed with the news. We always had to have the news on at 6 o'clock every night, new TV. We always had the papers in the house. Mm-hmm. And it was always impressed on us from a young age how important the media was in terms of putting pressure on the British government to reopen the Bloody Sunday inquiry.
Yes.
And, it was actually when, we were going to the Savile inquiry and stuff, it was often remarked upon, that journalists were there as witnesses and took photos, and without them, God knows where we would be, considering, you know, the whitewash that they attempted.
Absolutely.
Even though there were journalists there. So imagine what they would have attempted if journalists hadn't been there. I always was quite politically aware as I was growing up, and then I was a bit of a nightmare at school, to be honest, but did all right, and then decided when I was like 16 that I wanted to be a journalist. My school really wanted everybody to become a doctor or solicitor, and it just wasn't for me. So I went to Glasgow for university, and then I have honestly just taken every single unglamorous job that I could get. I mean, I have had the weirdest jobs. I was once the chief reporter for a magazine about trucks and lorries.
Wow.
So yeah, like I would have took anything and done anything to be a journalist. And then came back to Dublin like 3.5 years ago, and I've been here ever since, and I've been at the Examiner now for just a year and a week, so just passed my year anniversary there.
Wow, congratulations. That's fantastic. Thanks. So really, I guess from a young age then, your environment and of course led by the Bloody Sunday Justice campaign really shaped your future, so to speak, and you stuck with that. And I guess in that you saw how families could access justice perhaps via the media. So it's a very important, crucial medium in many respects that people don't often think about. And there often is this image of a journalist and a correspondent, you know, this glamorous job. But as you say, the road to it, and even now, I'm sure you're working very unsociable hours.
I'm not wearing very glamorous outfits at the minute, let me tell you. It's a lot of train journeys and tracks and bottoms.
Yeah, and you're on the go 24 hours. Sometimes I'd imagine.
It never stops, especially in politics now in COVID. You know, you could be stories break at 11:30 at night and 7:30 in the morning. It's non-stop.
So you cover really difficult stories, obviously, Aoife, and also tragic stories like the Stardust tragedy, which I've been following for quite some time now. For people who don't know, the Stardust fire, it was a fatal fire which took place in a nightclub in Artane in Dublin called the Stardust. It was in Ireland on the 14th of February 1981. So Aoife and lots of journalists have been covering that in detail now, and also, you know, the recent breaking news stories around mother and baby homes in Ireland. Again, in all of these matters, you're dealing with victims, relatives, survivors and families.
They're very ordinary people whom tragedy was visited on. They did not do anything to deserve this. Tragedy came to them. And for years, they had just been banging against the door of government trying to get some answers to what happened to their loved ones. And it really struck me that there were so many similarities between the Stardust and the Bloody Sunday Justice campaign. And I think that's why I got involved with it. And the longer it goes on, I actually have to say, the more emotional it gets, because we're at the stage now where a lot of the parents of young people who died in that fire are now dying.
Yeah.
You know, we had Christine Keegan die last year, her 2 daughters died, and she was, you know, one of the main campaigners, her and her husband John, who's also dead for a long time. Then we had Eugene Kelly, died last year as well. Yeah. I know Dara Mackin's actually been on this podcast talking about it as well.
Yeah,
so
Dara was
it's actually got
and even he, like, not even he, but you could see anybody involved. It just really, you can see the emotion and how it impacts them on so many levels. How could it not?
It's the unfairness of it all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These are people who are just normal working people, and the thing that sticks out the most, and if you ask anyone in Dublin, they will tell you this, that the reason these people were pushed aside is because of where they live and what society thought of where they live. These were working people who did not have private educations, who did not have big jobs. They were just working ordinary people. And, you know, the area where the Stardust was an area called Donnybrook. And obviously everyone knows the really posh part of Dublin is called Donnybrook. And there's a saying in Dublin about the Stardust that if the Stardust happened in Donnybrook rather than Donnybrook, they would have had answers a long time ago.
Right.
And they really believe that. It's a sense of unfairness. So that and along with the mother and baby homes,
Mm-hmm.
like the mother and baby homes is one of those things that it's just another chapter in a really long book about classism and sexism in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the only currency they seemed to deal in was shame and guilt. And reading the mother and baby homes report, we got an embargo copy at 8 in the morning.
Right.
You couldn't copy and paste. You couldn't control F. You had to read every line and go through every line. You couldn't split it up between journals. We only got one copy.
Sure.
So I sat from 8 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's, 10,000 pages. It's incredibly long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to get up and walk away twice because I was starting to cry because it just gets
it's
too much. It's
at times. Yeah, it really is.
Testimony of, I can't explain it as anything else but torture of pregnant women, torture of children.
Absolutely.
And it's rough going, and you'd have to be made of stone
you
not
would
to cry when you're reading it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think a lot of it comes with compartmentalizing it. You have to be able to get up and walk away. But I can openly say this, and I work with another really talented female journalist, Elaine Loughlin, who's done mammoth work on the mother and baby homes, and even we both said that neither of us slept that week, slept properly. There was nightmares. We weren't sleeping because of what we read in it, and we're just reading it. So I can't imagine what it was like to have to live through it and then go back and provide that testimony to a committee.
It's so difficult. It really is. And I guess it's another example, I suppose, of how the media, and it is whatever media you look at, whether it's social media, digital print, the press, coverage on RTE. I know there was the Joe Duffy show at one point had really revealed, the testimonies from people, and it was really hard hitting. And got the stories out there where maybe people were hearing it for the first time, the real detail around this with 13-year-old girls, 14-year-old rape, everything that went on. So again, it's the media was really the responsible for, or not responsible, but had shared those stories and has been so far reaching in a really positive way. But you're right, I think it's hard hitting. You'd have to be made of stone. So you have mentioned one of the challenges you faced, among others, was the fact that you're a young woman in this role in political, especially as a political correspondent. I'd imagine there's not too many, or am I wrong? Are you among a very select few?
Full-time, I think, full-time political correspondents, female political correspondents, I think there's maybe 6 of us.
Mm-hmm.
6. And
6.
There could be 20, at least 20 men, to be honest, when you think about it. So we're definitely in the minority.
In the minority. And the Irish Examiner had covered an article. It was Margaret E. Ward had contributed to it. I think it was earlier on this year, maybe last month in February. But it was just interesting in that one of the quotes was that women make up fewer than 1/3 of Irish media professionals, even less at top level. So the question was, how can the industry report on society if it doesn't reflect it? And I think that's a really valid question. So is there a problem in the industry, Aoife? And I mean, have you experienced it? I know you talked a little bit briefly about your own challenges, but is it a general problem, and what's being done to tackle it? And do you notice it?
Yes, definitely, it is a problem. You find when you go into the newsroom, reporters at the lower levels, it tends to be pretty gender split. There tends to be a lot of young women. And as the further you go up, there becomes less and less women at higher roles. The gender disparity becomes quite stark. I think I've had one female editor in my entire life. I think I've worked at maybe 10, 11 different publications.
Wow.
So there aren't. I know the Journal has a number of female editors. I can't think of any other newspapers that do. The Irish Times has only ever had 2 female political correspondents. So it's definitely the gender disparity is quite stark. And I think the issues you could start out as a reporter and you could be great, but it's when issues start to arise, like, men are more likely to get promoted.
Yeah.
there's also issues that the work is non-stop. It's not conducive to a regular routine. If you have children, and we know that women are more likely to be lumbered with childcare and responsibilities and caring for elderly parents or elderly family. So if you don't have a routine that you can stick to, that's going to cause issues. So you will often find that female journalists will move into things like marketing or public relations because they know that they're going to get, first of all, they're going to get better money. And it's a 9 to 5 or a 10 to 6 or whatever you want. And it's more conducive to like a nuclear family lifestyle. Also, there are issues within certain broadcasters with contracts, for instance, something like a rolling 3-month contract.
Right.
How are you supposed to go on maternity leave? We know that the BBC and RTE use rolling contracts. They have, you know, presenters that you might see. I know, for instance, in the BBC, presenters you might see every night, correspondence every night that you would assume as a member of staff, and you find that they aren't, that they're self-employed, they're a contractor. There's no sick pay for that. There's no paternity pay for that. And it only fits men.
Exactly.
So these are all the issues that come with the kind of employment side of it. The other side of it is it's just harder to be a woman in journalism. Women in general are less trusted by men. Men tend to be in powerful positions, whether they're politicians, whether they're CEOs, whether they're the senior counsels. So it's easier for men to build up their contacts because they're usually talking to other men.
And I wonder if that's probably reflected across many industries. But yeah, I see how you in particular would have to forge. It's so important for you to forge those relationships. Yet that's another barrier that you face. And I guess you have to be creative all the time in order to figure out, well, how am I going to form that relationship? How am I going to be able to cover that piece as well as my male counterpart or better than? You know, so it really, it's your mind has to be switched on another level all the time compared to your male counterpart.
It's something as stupid as like my colleague, he was able to forge a relationship with the Taoiseach by making small talk about Cork City Football Club. You know, they talk about football, they talk about GAA. Yes. I am not going to embarrass myself by pretending to talk that I know about GAA or any football team outside of Celtic because my boyfriend's a Celtic fan. So, like that kind of thing, even the notion of being able to go up to any politician and just talk about something like football is not an avenue that's open to me. I mean, I'm sure I could study football if I wanted, if I really needed the small talk, but I just don't have the time or the energy. No. So things like that. But there is another side of it. And I think life will get easier for female political correspondents when there are more female politicians. Like, I would have much better relationships with female politicians. I did a long run series about sexual harassment, and I spoke to a number of female TDs that I know for a fact would only tell me about their experiences because I was a woman. If one of my male colleagues came to them and said, "Tell me about all the times you were sexually harassed," they would probably just say, "I couldn't think of anything worse." To tell a man about all the times I was sexually harassed. So it works in both ways, but all the issues that we see with female political correspondents are the same issues that face female politicians.
Yes.
You know, politics is a male-dominated game. Community politics, grassroots politics is, you know, it's not conducive if you have young children, if you're caring for elderly parents, you know, it's hard to juggle these things if you have to go to meetings, stuff like that. So, and also barriers with, for instance, in Dublin, politicians don't get maternity leave. They don't get maternity pay. There is a cabinet minister. The Minister for Justice is now pregnant, and the government of Ireland in 2021 is trying to work out how to pay her maternity leave.
I saw that. Helen McEntee. I saw the coverage of that. It is absolutely shocking that was, I saw it highlighted previously, but now that it's something that's come to the fore because somebody's actually experiencing it, you're sitting going, oh my goodness, how can this be in reality? And as you said, you do have, I suppose, an intersection, a link there between journalism and politics because of the issues that you cover and the people you're speaking to. And you're right that there is a similarity in that women face similar barriers. And I know Senator Ivana Bacik had been really at the fore of trying to, I suppose, involve women in politics, but really to try and break down the barriers that stop them from considering it in the first place. And she had highlighted these 5 C's: the confidence, cash, culture, childcare and candidate selection around the group Women for Election. So you can really see how women perhaps leave their role when it gets to a more senior level because of those issues, and because they're primarily dealing with, childcare matters that they have to tend to. And it's not just women, it's women and minorities as well, trying to encourage entry into the media and into politics as well. But I wonder, are the figures worse now because of COVID? The pandemic seems to have really highlighted raw issues, acted as a catalyst almost to highlight barriers that women face and the suffering that women face. And I wonder, has the media been impacted in that way, in terms of both what it covers and the representation there within the media?
I think because we're still very much in the throes of COVID, we probably won't know until after the fact. But what I would be concerned about, and I've been thinking about this for a while, is that we already know that COVID is exacerbating all the issues that affect women already and making them worse. So we know that the bulk of employment losses, for instance, are women, in the hospitality industry. That is a very female-dominated industry. Those jobs have been lost. A lot of them are not coming back.
Absolutely.
Stuff like that. When recessions hit, it is women that bear the brunt of it.
Yeah.
And that's what I would worry about. And without more women in the media to tell those stories, those stories will be totally forgotten about. And I think, it's quite clear, if we even go back to the mother and baby homes, we can say, oh, it's great because the media was able to highlight all this. Yeah. But we have to remember that the media was operating when these mother and baby homes were operating, and the media paid absolutely no attention to what was happening in the mother and baby homes. So if you can, I think a lot of it is like, if you can't see it, if you can't see it, and if you don't know about these things because of your circumstances, you're not going to report on them. Like, for instance, I did a story about, I did a special report about the harassment of single mothers on the lone parent payment by social welfare inspectors in the Republic. And these women had the most horrific stories about social welfare inspectors going through their knicker drawers, sitting outside their house, because if you're found to have a boyfriend or a live-in partner, they take your single parent payment away from you. And they have inspectors that come out to your house to make sure you don't have a boyfriend. Wow. Now, the Department of Social Protection said, that's not the way it's supposed to be, and if anyone has a complaint, you can make a complaint. The story ran over a couple of days, and a TD came to me. He's working class, he's from North Inner City of Dublin, and he had said to me, I have been afraid of the social welfare inspector my entire life, and I never thought once to go to a journalist and explain that this was happening.
Yeah.
And he said, I never thought I would see anything like this in a newspaper. And I said, well, there probably hasn't really been anybody around or willing to publish stories about social welfare inspectors, because it wouldn't even be on their radar. The press, for all the great it does, is very middle class as well. So stories like this aren't getting done because there's just no one different in there. And I think the press is only going to get better the more diverse it gets.
Absolutely.
Because I don't expect people who have gone to private school and have had no interaction with the Department of Social Protection ever in their life to know about this, because how would they?
Nobody benefits from, that, I suppose, silencing or failure to share these stories. And I guess what happens in good coverage and good exposure of stories like this, it can help shape important policies. When you're able to voice those concerns that are often, ignored, and those voices that are often ignored. So you can probably see that coming together if you've been contacted by somebody like that and political representatives then that take it on. You can see the link there and how important and valued that is.
And I think too, we just benefit when our politics and when our media just looks like the population.
Yeah.
the journalism, and I'm the first, I never stop banging on about this, but journalism is the whitest place in Dublin. You know, there are no journalists of colour working in the mainstream media that I know of. The only, you know, person of colour in the Dáil is Leo Varadkar. There should be 13% of the Dáil should be people of colour, because that would be representative of the Republic, and it's just not. And, you know, journalism is exactly the same. So we are missing out huge chunks of news because we are not representing the entire nation.
I mean, half the population, women, 51%, are not represented, but this figure grows much higher when you're not including, as you said, minority and ethnic groups as well, which does make up. And I mean, it's just beneficial to everybody. And I suppose, I mean, how do we hold the media to account? Other industries, I suppose, have adopted policies and measures. And I think it's fair to say that there is some movement there. There's fantastic organisations and lobby groups that are pushing these matters onto the agenda. Like I think you'd mentioned, but just before we went on recording, Why Not Her, Women for Elections, Women on Air is another one, I think. But it's important to keep this high on the agenda, because other industries have worked through issues that they face around having a more diverse workplace and a representation that reflects society. So I guess there is still that call there from campaigners, lobbyists, people like yourself, women within the industry as well, to ensure that this doesn't, you know, move from the table, and that equality is something that the industry aspires to. I wonder how it's best to do that.
I think it's quite funny as well that the media will look everywhere apart from themselves. You'll see, you know, stories about, you know, only 28, this is completely hypothetical, but there'll be a story saying only 28% of people in STEM are women, and everyone's like, oh, that's terrible. And you know for a fact that the newsroom that story was written, and it's probably 29% woman. So, like, it is one of these things that they'll look everywhere else other than themselves.
Yeah.
We are starting to see changes, but it's change for change's sake. It's more social embarrassment than anything else. TV programs and radio programs are incredibly worried about people giving them flack online for having, you know, all men on a panel.
Yeah.
And they haven't actually realised the times when they're saying the quiet part out loud. So I cannot tell you the amount of times that a producer or a researcher from a radio program or a TV program will say to me, we would love to have you on because we need a woman. They say that out loud.
Wow.
And I'm dying to be like, you know, that's the quiet part. You're not supposed to say that. Because basically what they're saying is, we actually could take our leave you, but we need you because you're a woman.
Yeah.
And that's not gender equality.
It absolutely
You know
is
what I
not.
mean?
Well, no industry should be beyond scrutiny, and I think the media has a long journey to go, you know, to get on a par. And I know there is some movement. I know some programs itself are looking at 50-50 gender equality, but really there needs to be much more done. So it's great to have you highlighting some of the, I suppose, the personal challenges that you face, but also in a whole, this really, you know, opens up our eyes to the picture of women in the media in Ireland, and I guess across the board, not just in Ireland. And it fits in, I guess, with our Choose to Challenge theme. It's not our theme, it's the theme of International Women's Day 2021. It's the hashtag, and you're probably going to be involved in so much over the next few days.
I am going to be zooming everywhere. I am on every film.
As the woman in the media, and here you are.
The woman.
Another woman in the media. Well, we're glad that you were able to join us in among your busy schedule. But just on that, we're asking all of our guests, and we've had some fantastic guests so far, and we look forward to more recordings later this week. But what does it mean to you, and how do you interpret Choose to Challenge?
I think just calling stuff out when you see it, and also kind of correcting yourself. I have been trying, but I'm not very good at it. As people say, act like a man at work. So I used to say things like, if a headline was wrong and I was contacting the desk, I would say, hi, listen, I'm really sorry about this, but could you change this headline if it's not too much trouble, because it doesn't really reflect the content in the article. Yeah. No worries if you can't. Thanks very much. And all this kind of apologising for taking kind of, you know, asserting yourself.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to be like, not rude in any way, shape or form, but saying, hiya, can I get this headline changed because it's not reflective of the content? Thanks. You know, you
Yeah.
don't need to apologise for asking for stuff, and just being a bit more forthright, like not doubting yourself. I find like my first instinct is when I'm doing something, if someone questions it, I always assume automatically that I'm wrong and the person isn't wrong, even though I know I, you know, covered all my bases.
Is it a
or
form
whatever.
of imposter syndrome?
Probably.
Many people.
But let me tell you, there are a lot of men working in journalism who do not have one iota of imposter syndrome. And I wish I could half it and share it out with some people, because I believe some people could do with a dose of it.
Yeah.
But there
well,
is
it
a
is
bit
that
of
confidence and ego piece as well, I guess, you know.
Totally, and like men never, you know, a lot of men don't feel the need to question themselves because they just assume that they're right and they know better. And I think social media is where people really show who they are. You know, often you'll see journalists arguing with strangers on Twitter who disagree with them, and it brings everybody down. And I think sometimes you just need to be able to say, listen, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, and I don't really need to get dragged into this. But I think it tells you a lot about the person if they're choosing to spend their time arguing with people on Twitter about the content of their article or their column or whatever else it is. So yeah, maybe I think my challenge thing is just to be a bit more assertive.
And that's, I mean, for aspiring journalists listening to this, that is such honest and great advice. And I think just the insight into your work there in journalism, in political journalism in particular, has really shed a light on the reality of it. It's just been fantastic to have you on, and I really look forward to speaking to you again and also following your work. I wish you the best of luck with current pieces that you're covering at the moment, and we'll be back in touch, I hope, someday.
Thank you so much. This is lovely. Thank you.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.